Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator of this Saturday edition of The People Show. And it is our legal hour that we do every Saturday with the Cook County Circuit Court Judge Leonard Murray, who will be joining us momentarily. Good to be with you again on this Saturday afternoon. It's a beautiful day outside, and I hope that you'll take some time to just join us for these few minutes, and the judge will come on, and all of your legal questions that you have, you can type them into the chat, and of course, the judge will respond to your questions. We have got so much that we have to endure, so much that we have to talk about, so much work that we have to do, and it is important that we engage at every level of involvement in our political dynamics on a local level, on a state level, and on a federal level. We have to be engaged. The advances, the rights, the progress that we are trying to make, and that those who are trying to help us make it are being attacked at every level by the Republican, conservative, MAGA movement in this country, and has been going on for decades, but it's been put on steroids in 2010, starting with the Tea Party, certainly starting with the election of President Barack Obama, where people thought that race relations had gotten better in this country. But the truth of the matter is that I think we're finding out that race relations have not gotten better in this country. We're only finding out that they have been masked for a certain period of time, or certainly they've been masked because the power of the predominantly white man has, in many respects in the past, they have not felt threatened. When Barack Obama became president, their power, their control, or their entitlement was threatened. And so you saw it happen even during the campaign with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, who black folks call the first black president. But you saw their racism come out when they felt that power was slipping away from them, and it was a black man who was getting that power. Racism does not have any political line. There are people who are racist that are Democratic. There are people who are racist that are Republicans. Racism is period. It is prejudice plus power plus privilege. And there is no such thing as a black racist. We could be prejudiced, we could be bigoted, but in order to have the power to do to a people and to set policies in place, we as black people don't have that power, and we certainly have privilege. We have one of the three main components of racism. All right. So, and I've got to do one thing. I'm going to be bringing the judge on, but I got to take a pause here because I forgot to do one thing. So 1 second. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I'm back. My apologies. I had to take a pause because I forgot to make the connection. I have to do a hard connection in order for us not to lose the feed as we have been doing in the past. So, all right. So let me bring in, I'm going to be bringing in Judge Murray in just a second here. So let me just say to those of you who are joining the program, we're going to be entering into our legal hour discussion with Cook County Circuit Court Judge Leonard Murray. And for all of your legal questions that you have, if you have questions, type them into the chat. I'll read them off, and Judge Leonard Murray will respond and will expound on them. Now, just remember that the judge cannot give you personal legal advice. He can address questions relative to a legal matter or situation, and then he can address that. But he certainly cannot give you advice to your personal situation if you have one. All right, so we are going to take your questions. So I just want to make sure that we have that clarification. But I'm going to be talking about things more along the political lines and the responsibility and why it is that we must vote, and we must make sure that we reelect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in 2024. If we are going to hang on to democracy and hang on to protecting the rights of people who look like you and I, and certainly protecting the democratic norms and improving upon those. Not that we're taking this purist attitude, but we certainly cannot go to the alternative and certainly cannot afford to bring back another 4 years of Donald Trump that will be put on steroids of what he did during his first years. All right, let me bring our guest in, Judge Leonard Murray, who has been on in our waiting room. Judge Murray, how you doing? I think we're not hearing you. Your mic is muted.
Hear me now?
There you go.
Okay.
All right. Okay, fantastic. All right. Okay, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great amidst all of the a myriad of things that are going on. In spite of that, I'm doing great, and certainly in spite of my allergies kicking in as they usually do right on time for the seasons to change. They're kind of like the seasons. The seasons kick in just like they're supposed to, and so are my allergies doing what they supposed to do. You know, during the COVID years, when we had to wear a mask every day, I did not realize that I was being protected not only from COVID, but I was being protected from all of the particulates in the air that would inflame my allergies, and so I sort of wish and regret that I took the mask off because I didn't have any allergy problems for a couple of years.
Well, I think I mentioned to you when we spoke during the week that I had a positive COVID test last Friday, which was a total surprise to me. Uh, didn't have any significant symptoms at all. Um, just had a slightly elevated fever and then a dry cough. But otherwise, I was fine. So I was really shocked when I got that result because I can't imagine uh, who I was in contact with that may have passed along to me because I just no one in my normal daily cycle uh, reported having a positive reading. So I just apparently must have been somebody in my comings and goings back and forth to the courthouse and in the neighborhood that has it and may not know it as well.
Wow.
But it was a mild case, but I thought it would prudent not to you know circle around folks so as not to pass it on to anyone else. So I did things remotely for court this week.
Okay. All right. But you look good and you seem to be feeling better.
Oh, yeah. Well, that didn't feel bad at all. It was just the fact that the scientific test said you get COVID. So
Right.
But beyond that, I had nothing, no apparent symptoms of being infected.
Yeah. Well, these new strands, and I'm not sure which strand we're in now, but the reports of the new strands is that they are not as lethal, and the symptoms seem to not be as stringent, in particularly for those people who have been vaccinated and boosted. And
Yeah,
so, but COVID is still out there, and people are still dying.
it is.
I heard a report probably about a month ago from one of the talk show hosts. I believe it was Tom Hartman. His good friend had COVID, determined or found out that he had COVID, and then died the next week. So people are still dying from COVID. COVID is still out there, and so we still have to, uh, be very aware of that.
Yeah, we still need to take it serious.
Yes, yes. No matter how much you are tired of COVID, COVID is still a real thing, and
Yep.
um, you know, uh, let's not be unwise about the reality of COVID, because it is a real situation out there. So, all right. So listen, what's happening in the legal world? I talked to you briefly about something, and I want to talk about that because it was something that I was completely unaware of. That I received a phone call from someone on, I believe it was yesterday, that I received a phone call from someone in mid-afternoon, and I called you about it because I'd never heard of it. He's a Uber slash taxi driver, and I believe this was in his taxi driver capacity, that he had dropped off a fare at a location, and someone saw his cab and tried to get into the cab, and they wanted to go to a certain area, and he said that he was not um, driving to that particular area, and something transpired um, in that process, that he didn't, or he left, or he said the person never got into the car. The door was open, but they never got into the car. And but he said that they are now trying to um, suspend his license for 3 years. Now, I did not ask him whether it was his driver's license, because I didn't know or think that they could suspend your driver's license from or at the administrative hearing level. Um, and so I reached out to you to talk to you about this. So, um, so do they have the right or the power to suspend a person's driver's license for any reason at the administrative hearing level? Do the administrative judges or hearing officers have that? I don't like to call them judges because they're not judges.
Yeah, they're not. They're in fact under the city code, which established that whole administrative hearing process for the city. They're referred to as uh, um, as hearing officers, not as judges.
Okay. Okay. All right. So, um, all right. So, what powers do they have in this particular case? And again, I don't know all of the details because I referred him to an attorney so that he can contact them and really give them the details so that they could understand what's going on. But um, a person files a complaint against a cab or medallion owner because they didn't take their fare for whatever the reason was. They filed a complaint, and he says that their the attorney, I guess, the uh, for the city, or the attorney that is representing the city's interest in this particular matter, said to him that you could lose your license for 3 years. Now, I'm not sure what that is. Can you help clarify what that is?
Sure. So let's first talk about how it is that this is possible. So, and I may well have mentioned this in past our past sessions, but it's always good to repeat it, and it's a history lesson, if you will, a civics lesson, and that is Illinois is what's referred to as a home rule state. So, any activity that is not covered by state law, the various towns, villages, and cities, they have the right to enact rules. Typically, at that level, they're referred to as ordinances that govern local conduct. For example, local speed limits, stop signs, how far your house must be set back from the property line. All these sorts of things are within the ambit of what's called local rule or home rule. And Chicago has enacted a pretty significant set of home rules called ordinances. In fact, the city code is just voluminous, and I couldn't even begin to, even at this instance, as long as I've been involved with it, begin to tell you its full reach. But in any event, the licensing of, and this is a situation that I believe probably involved a taxi driver, not an Uber driver. Um, but taxi cab operation is regulated by the Consumer Affairs Department. So likely what happened here is that uh, someone who apparently was trying to hail a cab, and coincidentally, the driver of this cab uh, 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 was discharging a fare, apparently fairly incident to where this person was trying to hail a cab. And I guess we don't know, but it sounds like the exchange was one where he or she explained that for whatever reason, uh, I am not going to the area uh, that you are seeking a ride to, uh, and therefore he would not accept the fare, the engagement. Uh, that person complained to the city's Department of Consumer Affairs, which regulates taxi cab operation in the city of Chicago. Um, and now they issued a citation based on that complaint. And based on whatever fact finding they did after receiving the complaint, they've come to the conclusion that it was worthy of a complaint being issued against the driver of that vehicle, that taxi cab operator. Um, so it is a process uh, uh, that will be adjudicated uh, at the administrative hearing level that is operated by the city of Chicago before a hearing officer uh, who would whose job it is uh, to listen to the facts, receive evidence, testimony, documents, and come to a conclusion, a decision as to whether or not, in fact, there was a violation here, and if so, uh, what's the appropriate sanction? Now, uh, going back to one of your questions initially, and that is whether or not this affects this person's driver's license, it does not. Only Secretary of State has the ability to regulate driver license issuance and continued validity in the state of Illinois. It is not the city of Chicago. So let's first destroy that myth. Secondly, since the city regulates the operation of uh, taxi cabs in the city, um, then um, they have the ability to affect the um, continued right of this taxi cab driver to uh, operate in that capacity. And offhand, I cannot tell you what the possible range of punishment is or sanctions, if you will. but it sounds like someone has suggested to him that it could be as much as 3 years that he would be barred from um, operating a taxi cab in the city limits of Chicago. But of course, he should have, or maybe will be soon, served with a citation that would enumerate what the specific city ordinance violation that is alleged. It should also set forth some facts in terms of who the complainant is and what the situation is that led to the issuance of the citation, and then provide at least an initial hearing date um, for he and his lawyer to appear um, before ultimately there would be a hearing date established for essentially a trial on the question of whether or not the citation um, has merit or not and can be proven.
Yeah, well, when he called me and he talked to me about it and was telling me about it, I said, the fact that they are even suggesting, based on what he's telling me, if the city or the attorneys on behalf of the city at the administrative hearing process, if they are suggesting that they may be imposing a 3-year restriction on you operating, that is a pretty stiff um, penalty for someone who earns their living that way. Now, it doesn't affect him as an Uber driver, but certainly if he has a medallion and he has several drivers that operate under that medallion, then all of those drivers, I would presume, are going to be impacted by that decision if, in fact, that is the final determination.
Yes, well, we don't know uh, what the violation is, and based on the violation, that would dictate what the sanction could be. I've had some cases in the past that dealt with disputes between a passenger and a driver over how they were treated and so forth and so on. Um, Normally, I think the case that comes to mind is one where the city was seeking maybe as much as a 6-month suspension from operation as a taxi driver. I don't think it affected the medallion, though. I think it was essentially his or her right to drive. I think it was a
Mhm.
male driver, so I think it was his right to drive during that 6-month period. But of course, um, that's dramatic. That affects their livelihood, their ability to earn a living and support themselves and their families. So it is a very significant and serious situation. Um, I think you were correct to suggest that he should consult with a lawyer um, and contest it. We don't really know what the underlying allegations are, um, uh, whether or not a racial animus has been suggested here. We don't know the races of the parties involved, or the circumstance of the person who tried to hail the cab. Um, Whether or not they're suggesting they had some disability that aggravated um, the situation and the rejection of the being hired. Essentially, that's what you do: is you hire a taxi driver. Um, Based on something else that may not be apparent based on what you were told. Um, but yeah, the city does have uh, that scope of authority to regulate the operation of taxis in its limits. Um, um, so so yeah, but it does not. Would not affect his right to drive a vehicle as such. That only Secretary of State can do that. And this activity doesn't sound as if it was a dangerous situation in terms of operating a vehicle. It's really more failure to accept a fare, which comes within the auspices of the Director of Consumer Affairs for the City of Chicago.
Yeah, and I would imagine, yeah, they could look at that and say, this was a decision that was a discriminatory decision based on either the area or based on the person's ethnicity, whatever the case may be. But I just thought that, this was very novel to me that this would be held at the administrative hearing level, in that they could impose that kind of sanction on an operator.
Right.
So,
and it's it's a function of the city's authority to regulate taxi cab operations within its limits.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, that's good. So it would not affect other drivers. It just affects that individual driver. So it's not going to put a total block on any other drivers that operate under his medallion.
Yeah.
Well, I think, that's good. I think it's a very interesting situation, and I hope that he's able to get it wiped out. I met this gentleman when I was doing a story on the speed cameras and the red light cameras, and he was somebody that I met as we were trying to get people to interview when Lori Lightfoot lowered the threshold. So met him down at the administrative hearing because he had received a couple of those citations, and then he called me back because he still had my information. Called me back the other day about this particular situation, and it sounded very serious. He sounded like he was under a bit of stress about it. So I did refer him to a couple of attorneys that he could talk to and see, who he felt comfortable working with. But it sounded pretty serious. So, but it's interesting. It's very, very, very interesting that they have that kind of power down at the administrative hearing level. And speaking of that, if they have the power to, sanction someone and suspend someone, what other powers do they have at the administrative hearing?
Well, excuse me. That's a very that's a very sophisticated question, Mark. And for the reason that there is this misunderstanding of who they are, that they are not judges. So essentially, what they do is they're fact finding, and they will either agree or disagree with the sanction that um, the director's attempting to impose based on this situation. And of course, with operation of motor vehicles, then that's governed by ordinance as well. So they are saying yay or nay to whether or not the citation issued by the city is justified based on what they review. Um, so they're not independently, if you will, um, uh, creating a scenario where they impose the penalty is really ordinance based, and that you are entitled to due process relative to these claims by the city, and they are either affirming uh, that citation or penalty is valid or not. And that's essentially the situation here. It's a little different though, because there is fact finding necessary here to attempt to support or at least reject the commissioner's viewpoint that a citation is valid and should be issued. Um, but otherwise, they don't have the separate authority, if you will, to impose a fine. It's all created by ordinance. And they're either uh, agreeing with the finding of liability under the ordinance or not. But they don't have the independent authority as a judge would to impose a fine or sanction.
So, in other words, that the ordinance and the penalties are set in place based on certain findings, and the hearing officers have to listen to the arguments, and they have to make a decision on whether or not the city has met its burden um, for the particular fine that they have imposed or citation that they have issued or not.
Correct.
If the respondent is able to demonstrate that the city erred or did not meet its um, burden of doing that, which is by the preponderance. It's not, beyond a reasonable doubt, but the bar is lowered, that it only has to tip the scale and be more likely than that you were cited properly by the city for whatever that particular um, offense was.
Yes, that's correct. It is not the bar in place for a criminal violation beyond a reasonable doubt, but essentially it's equivalent to proving a case uh, at a trial that is more likely true than not that what has been alleged has occurred. Um, but how that is defined is really uncertain. It's really
Exactly.
what the person feels. There's nothing that anybody can point to say that this is definitely how you determine the standard because there's nothing out there. Uh, that's why for about the 4 years that I would preside over jury trials, it was all interesting to me um, uh, in terms of how, depending upon the jury size, 6 to 12, folks who were total strangers would get together and decide a case. Um, you know, before coming to the courthouse that morning, they had never seen each other before. But despite that lack of familiarity, they would somehow organize themselves into a working group that would be able to adjudicate and decide a case. And it's always interesting. Uh, so in this case, it's a jury of one. The hearing officer listens to the evidence and then comes to a conclusion based on what he or she has heard. Now, of course, uh, I'm sure they try to be objective, but it's always curious to me that they always say that they don't work for the city. Well, yes, you do. The city's
Right.
paying their salary. Now, many of them are lawyers, as I understand it. So, they are bound by an additional oath that a non-lawyer would not be. So, hopefully, in terms of how they're approaching things, uh, they remember that the oath that they took when they were sworn in as lawyers as well, in terms of how they are coming to decide how a case should end up.
You know, I've often thought it was a bit humorous that a administrative hearing officer would disclose or make it a point to disclose to respondents that they do not work for the city. And if they do not work for the city, who is it that pays them? Are they paid by the state? Are they paid by the city?
Well, they're not paid by the state, and
So,
they are not volunteers.
right. And they're paid a pretty handsome hourly rate to be there. And so the only other body that could be paying them is not some independent arm, it's the city of Chicago.
Yeah, it's humorous to me because in my current position now for the past 7.5 years. Um, to read that language in the transcripts that were provided for the record on administrative review where they make that statement. And I guess they're trying to uh, give an appearance of being totally objective and independent. But I think it's folly. to suggest that, or at least to tell people, you don't work for the city. Well, yes, you do. I mean, you work for who pays you. So uh, it's maybe disingenuous to not understand the motivation behind making that claim, but it's just not true. And I think they'd be better off just being honest with the facts than trying to lay the impression that I'm not here because of the city. Well, yes, you are. They told you when to come, where to come, and how long you'll be there. So yes, you are. Um,
I don't think that the city goes down through, some list of attorneys through bar associations and pick out attorneys and call them. I think you have to apply for these positions.
yeah, you're right. They're not. It's not a attorney referral list such as some of the bar associations maintain. It's a group of folks who somehow have been able to uh, be engaged by the city to do this work, and which is fine. There
Right.
there are administrative tribunals throughout the legal system.
Sure.
Many of which most of us are totally unaware of.
Right.
It's part of the game. Well, not game. It's just part of the system,
Hmm.
and it's necessary because the courts could not handle all these matters. Frankly, we'd be overwhelmed. Uh, but the statute does permit you to seek court review if you disagree with the outcome that you received there. Um, and there's a lot of confusion that exists. Uh, no matter what the stage of the hearing is, the order that the city enters on each occasion has this language about it's boilerplate language about 21 days to file a motion to set aside in the event of a default, and then 35 days to file a case in the circuit court. Well, if the case is not over, neither of those works. And I can't tell you uh, uh, how many times I see cases where uh, the case is not over at the administrative level, but the party has filed an action in state court because they read that language and believed and didn't understand that they did not have a final order yet.
Yeah. It is, I mean, it's in a lot of, well, certainly I think it's misleading. I think it's certainly a misrepresentation of the truth, where they ask for people to raise their hand and to affirm to an oath that they're going to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, but they start out by telling us something that is not true. And I think it's very deceptive, and I think it should be changed. I think that they need to stop making that declaration when they open up their hearings, because they do work for the city. Now, maybe they're trying to split a hair of saying, no, I don't work for the city. I'm not employed by the city. I am contracted by the city. Maybe that's the distinction that they're trying to make, but nonetheless, they work for the city. They are there on the city's property. They are, as you say, they're told when to come, where to report to, um, and for what period of time to be there, and that establishes an employee, that there's somebody who is directing you to do certain things. So I just think that fundamentally they should stop doing it, because it just it's not true, and I think that it compromises the process.
Yep. So, in any event, the situation that you were contacted by,
Yeah,
it will initially go through that process, and
yeah,
then uh, either side that believes the outcome was wrong, there they have a right to seek appeal.
Yeah.
in the circuit court. I have, it's not frequent, but from time to time, um, we have appeals filed by the city of Chicago because they believe that the outcome was adverse to their position and is incorrect. So
Mhm.
they do appeal, not often, but it does occur.
Have you had many cases or cases similar to the one that I have described to you?
Not a lot. In fact, when we talked about it, you described it early in the week. I was trying to think back to the last one that I'm aware of, and I think, as you know, I screen every case that comes into our division, and I cannot remember the last case that we've had that involved a taxi cab driver's activity. Um, while engaged in the business of driving a taxi in the city of Chicago. Um, the last situation that comes to mind that I recall is one where it was a passenger who suggested uh, that she was functioning with a disability and that the driver did not give her the additional assistance that um, she required or sought on the occasion of the engagement. Um, or if my memory may not be perfect on this, but may have not accepted the fare because of that situation. So, um, but that's got to be more than a year ago. So we don't get those cases often. At least they're not appealed to the circuit court often, I suppose. But that case, I believe, would have to have been. It was probably pre-COVID, as a matter of fact. So it's been quite a while.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, this is going to be very interesting. I'm going to follow this through. I'm going to follow this to see and to get some more information on based on what the allegations are.
Yeah.
Because for somebody to suggest that they're being told by uh, the city that you could potentially receive a sanction of or suspension for 3 years is pretty harsh, which either indicates that you did something that was
Pretty
uh, pr-
severe.
pretty severe or pretty serious,
Yeah.
and that they have evidence to support that. Now, he did mention that there was some sort of video or something, but he said it was only about a second or two.
Hmm.
And that may have come from the respondent or the complainant.
Um, well, I don't know that taxis are required to have a video inside the interior of the vehicle.
Yeah,
And if it was a video by the refused passenger, I don't know, since I can't believe any of this would have been anticipated, um, that this person would have been filming all along or in advance of their attempt to hail a cab. So I'm curious as to what it would show.
right.
But I guess in his conversations with you, you may discover that going down the road, because if they intend to use that at the hearing, they're going to have to turn that over.
Yeah. Yeah, I meant to mention as in that other conversation, but not to belabor it, that when we were talking about administrative people who are saying they don't work for the city, I remember when during the Rahm Emanuel administration, where they found that when they changed from Red Flex to the Xerox contractor, and Xerox started their computer systems recorded the timing of the yellow light time and found that there were several of the tickets that were issued under the minimum required of 3 seconds.
3 seconds. Yeah.
And this one administrative hearing officer that we um, found was dismissing the city's cases left and right. As a matter of fact, on one particular one, the city sent a battery of attorneys in to argue against us on several of these cases. It was quite comical that we had all these lawyers down there trying to defend the city's position. But what they ended up doing was, mysteriously, that particular hearing officer was placed on another post. He was placed in a post to only review mail-in tickets that were contested. And then when we made a noise about that, they put him back on the minutes. So, I think that sort of clarifies who they actually work for.
Yeah, and that process is interesting where, uh, I always have to be careful here, but, I
Sure.
suggest to folks that, um, if, although it's inconvenient, you may be better off protesting your citation in person rather than by mail or email. Um, and I also try to explain that is in fact your hearing. The method that you choose to protest the hearing, I'm sorry, the citation, that's your hearing. So if you elect to protest it by mail or email, you don't get a second bite of the apple.
Right.
That is in fact your hearing, even though you're not present. So you may, as inconvenient as it is, and how it may affect your daily life and schedule, you may well be better off coming in person and registering your protests and explaining yourself. Then, however it is, they adjudicate those mail-in and email protests that are received.
Well, I will say this certainly to people, and this is not on behalf of Judge Murray, but I'm saying this on behalf of myself and the citizens to abolish red light cameras, that we always recommend to people to go in person and contest whatever the violation is, so that if the ruling doesn't happen in your favor, you have another remedy that you can go and get an administrative review. So you certainly should do that, and we have been telling people to do that for years, because I have seen on clear cases of where the city was wrong and someone contested by mail and they lost. And that was it. That was
Well,
it.
they can seek review there, but it's just it's a steeper climb.
Yes.
Where you're trying to review a situation where you protested the ticket by mail or email.
Yeah, it typically doesn't go your way.
Yeah.
It typically does not go your way at that level. So folks, make sure that, if you're going to contest, please take the time, go in person. I know that sometimes it seems a bit arduous, but your best shot is to be in person. It's already very difficult anyway to appeal some of those types of violations. So, but yeah. All right. So I wanted to talk a little bit about. I think we talked about this. I don't know if we can talk about what is happening at the Supreme Court, where there are these cases, and of course, our three branches of government are self-governing, and the Supreme Court, makes up its own rules of engagement and conduct, and that's it. But there are some controversies that are being pointed out and alleged. But what we're finding is that there are some clear connections by some of the sitting Supreme Court justices in cases that they're actually hearing. And it appears that the justices who may be connected to those issues don't appear to indicate that in any way, shape, or form that they're going to um, recuse themselves from having any participation in ruling on that. Um, I think that, this is alarming to us and providing a side of the Supreme Court, which already has a very, very low um, trust approval rating from the public at large. And that's happened even more so in the last, say, 8 or 10 years. Um, but is there anywhere in Congress that Congress can actually take some sort of actions if, in fact, they deem or there is clear evidence that the Supreme Court is engaging in undermining the judiciary?
Well, you mentioned the fact that our system of constitutional government provides for three levels of government: executive, legislative, and then judicial, and that each of those branches essentially are self-regulating.
Mhm.
Um, and on the federal level, probably even more so. In Illinois, we have um, a tribunal called the Judicial Inquiry Board. So if a person um, believes that um, there's been some ethical violation by a judge, you can send in a letter or call them to register this complaint, and then they undertake an investigation as to whether or not there's any merit to it. In fact, here, the judge against whom the allegation is raised may not even know about it. And they don't typically reach out to the judge until they determine that there's some merit to the situation that does um, merit, at least a warrant, an investigation. And then if they believe there's an ethical violation, essentially they file a complaint uh, with what's called a courts commission, which is a body that will then try the allegation like a tribunal um, as such. Um, and its composition is both judges, and I think there may be uh, two lay people who are part of it to adjudicate the allegations, and then if there's a basis um, for the claim, there can be a sanction imposed. The number of different levels, from some that is moderate to removal from the bench. Uh, Now, that's as to trial and appellate positions. As to the Illinois State Supreme Court position, uh, that will take impeachment uh, before the state legislature body, similar to what happens on the federal level for impeachment. Um, uh, in, you know, Impeachment by the House of Representatives, and then a trial in the Senate, and then guilty or not there. On a federal level, and I tried to clarify this. The federal courts, there is a system in place, I should say, to deal with misconduct by um, trial court and reviewing court judges. Um, that is essentially administered by the Supreme Court itself. They don't have a separate tribunal, if you will, to adjudicate that. So the process is one that is governed by a system put in place by the Supreme Court. They don't directly get involved in it, but they've got a system in place to deal with those ethical violations that are alleged. Now, as the Supreme Court members, and you might remember a number of years ago, um, there was a Judge Alcee Hastings out of Florida, who formerly was, or let me back up, who was a federal judge,
Yes.
who was indicted and found not guilty.
Yes. Was
Uh,
also one of my law school lecturers.
and then later ran for Congress, as it
Yes.
was. And let me remember, was he found guilty? I think he
He was found guilty. He
guilty.
was found guilty. And then he was later exonerated of that.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
That's what I was thinking about. Ultimately, he it was deemed that he had not committed the offense, but then in the
Correct.
meantime, he ran for Congress and was elected.
Yes.
Uh, now, if there's allegations by the Supreme Court against a Supreme Court member, essentially would be impeachment as well. Um, I don't know that any U.S. Supreme Court member has ever been impeached that I can recall. I don't claim to be a historian, but I don't think that's ever been the case. Um, um, so it's such so in between um, misconduct that supports impeachment and something less. Uh, at the Supreme Court level, um, there's nothing there. Of course, currently there's a suggestion that uh, uh, because of the activity of the wife of Justice Thomas, that he should not be involved in consideration of the January 6th activities. And then, as I understand it, something recently has come out about Alito and some paraphernalia that may have been connected to January 6th, and whether or not that is a question that should raise the issue of his continued involvement in considering uh, uh, that litigation. I'm sorry, not litigation, but that trial and the outcome. Um, so they're raising these issues where or issues are being raised, I should say, where there seems to be a demonstrated connection um, of an attitude that maybe those justices might have about the activity that occurred that day. And if that's correct, then should they step aside and not decide those cases that involve um, that situation? Um, so it is interesting, something to watch. Thomas, of course, I think is pretty vehemently pushed back against the whole idea that he should not preside over those cases. Um, Alito, I don't know what his response has been to what the current allegations are, because I think it's something that's pretty recent um,
Yes.
as being discovered. So I guess we'll have to be watchful in terms of how they respond to it. And then, of course, with Thomas, there was questions about his association with a fairly wealthy um, Republican supporter, um, and financial benefits realized by him
Harlan Crow.
and or his family.
Yeah,
Um,
Harlan Crow, who bought a home from and paid $140,000 for two parcels of land and a house, and it made hundreds of thousands of dollars in improvement that Justice Thomas's mother still resides in. So,
yeah.
yeah. All right, well, listen, we're out of time. Matter of fact, to answer that question, the only justice to be impeached was an associate justice, Samuel Chase, in 1805. The House of
Okay.
Representatives passed articles of impeachment against him. However, he was acquitted by the
In the
Senate,
Senate.
who decided how many justices are on the court. So we've not had any Supreme Court justices that have been
Impeached.
impeached. All right, that's going to do us for this week. Some great conversation there. We're going to continue next week with Judge Leonard Murray, who is the Cook County Circuit Court supervising judge. Um, I always say in housing, but administrative review and other things that he has great responsibilities for. And he's also the man who married my wife and I. So we certainly uh, are very grateful and thankful for him for presiding over our nuptials. Thank you very much, Judge
And,
Murray.
and Mark, one
And
of the things you might get to next week is this whole area of dog ownership in Chicago and things that folks need to be mindful about.
yes, definitely want to talk about that. Let's make sure that we talk about that next week. I am a dog owner and a dog lover, but there are some certain responsibilities that we certainly need to talk about. So next week we certainly will talk about that on the program. So you all stay tuned for the legal hour on next Saturday at 1 o'clock. Mark Wallace and Judge Murray. Judge Murray, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Have a good
All
week.
right,
And
you too. Same deal. All right, folks, so that's going to do it for this week edition of the People Show's Legal Hour with Mark Wallace and Judge Murray. Make sure that you tune in for the Monday night edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X, formerly known as Twitter. We're going to be talking about all of the issues of the day and continuing to bring you all of the information that you need to know to make informed decisions about what we need to do. And also, I want you to make sure that you do get involved in us developing, building, and organizing the largest Black independent voting block, 10by10towin.org. Go to 10by10towin.org, register and sign up there. It doesn't cost you anything. And then also text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385. Again, text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385. One more time, text 10x10 to the number 855-909-1385 so that you can receive all of the 10 by 10 to win updates and our meeting notices that we meet every Thursday from 6:30 to 8, organizing the greatest, largest Black independent voting block in Chicago, Cook County, and the state of Illinois. Why are we doing that? We're doing that so that we can select and elect people from our own that we can send to public offices, whether they're local, state level, or federally, so that they will represent the interests and meet the demands of our communities. The only way that we can do that is we've got to have power to do that. The only way that we can have power to do that is that we have to be organized to do it. We have to organize mass numbers of people. We have the numbers, but they're not organized. That's what the effort is, to empower us to make decisions for ourselves through people that we select as our representatives, as opposed to somebody who is in an office determining who the people are and who the candidates are that we get to choose from. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for tuning in to the program. Please like and share the information so that we can bring more people to get the truth and the facts about what's going on in our city, in our county, in our state, and certainly in our country. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend and have a great holiday. And let's reflect on those people who are serving in our military and serving our country, and those people who have sacrificed their lives for the freedoms that you and I enjoy today. Let's be very reflective on this Memorial Day holiday, and certainly be safe.